Moving on, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's keynote session. Our speaker today is somebody that I've seen speak on several occasions, and I can tell you I've got my notebook and my pen at the ready to take copious notes. Today, we're joined by Chris Field, who is the managing editor of Retail Connections. Chris is a long-standing retail journalist, editor, and analyst. He has worked for many years advising retailers across both the US and the UK. He's retained by the National Retail Federation. He's also the go-to retail commentator for Sky News and has written for publications including the Financial Times, Retail Week, Drapers, and plenty more. Chris has witnessed some of the most major evolutions and inflection points in retail and e-commerce to date, and he's here today to help us try to understand how loyalty has and continues to be transformed. We'll have time for a few questions, so if there's anything that you'd like to ask Chris, then please do use the chat function, the Q&A, and we'll get to as many people as we can after his speech. So without further ado, I will welcome Chris on stage to talk about what he perceives to be the biggest loyalty opportunity of our lifetime. Chris, welcome to Loyalty Connect. The stage is yours.
Welcome, everybody. Yes, I've been taught with webinars not to say good morning or good afternoon because who knows where you all are. I'd also like to extend my thanks to the Loyalty Lion team for having the courage to bring this all together. I appreciate we're all on a bit of a journey back to some kind of place that is familiar to us, even if it isn't normal. You've had an introduction to me from Fiona, so thanks for that. I'll add one thing just to date me, is I do actually remember interviewing Richard Ratner of the jewelry chain Ratner's many years ago, and he was the first guy, or I was the first person he said that our earrings are as cheap as a M&S prawn sandwich, which, as you may know, didn't go down very well in the press and kind of destroyed the business at the time. So, you know, careful what you say. So today, for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about the crisis that we've had and to some extent is casting a long shadow, but that will positively transform loyalty. And I think it's actually made loyalty interesting again, because I've been writing about this stuff for many years and kind of have almost sort of dipped in and out of it. What I do know is that it's a lot tougher than ever to win and keep customers. And I appreciate our main focus today is on keeping the customers you've got and how tough it is to win their loyalty, to know that you have it and indeed to keep it. But let me say on a positive note, I think the changes that have been brought about by the pandemic are actually the best opportunity that has been presented to retailers and brands in a lifetime. And I mean that. Having said that, I know it won't be easy. We were all talking about how to win greater loyalty through personalization quite a few years before COVID struck. So it's not as if anything here is new to you in terms of how important loyalty is. But I think the urgency to act has never been stronger. And I'm actually going to give you some reasons why there is urgency to act. Now, some of those reasons will be familiar to you, but when you see the full list, the full horror, if you like, I'm hoping that that will spur some of you to take greater action. There are two parts to my presentation. The first is a philosophical consideration of the word loyalty. Bear with me. Okay, that does sound very dull, but it's important, as you'll see. And then the second will be the challenges facing retailers and brands. And I think if you have a good overview or a good understanding of what is in front of you and indeed what's coming, and there's a few things I'm going to share with you that I and others have seen that are not necessarily widely understood in the market. So hopefully a bit of a heads up for you. So first, the philosophy. So whenever the topic of loyalty comes up, I always tend to switch off, which is not to say I haven't been paying attention. As I said, I've started writing about this subject more than 30 years ago. And I think that I can say I have seen what I understood it to be at the time firsthand. And to give you a little anecdote, I used to work for a gentleman called Alan Sugar at a company called Amstrad. Anyone over a certain age is going to remember them, right? They essentially launched the consumer PC revolution, the one that IBM was hoping to own, but was clearly charging too much money. First thing I wanted to say, and I feel I can say this, that I don't work for him anymore. He's not a nice man, okay? So stop telling me that he's a cuddly teddy bear underneath it all, because he's really not. And despite all of that, despite standing in a circle when we had our meetings, and he would give a kind of public dressing down to his managing director at the time, Malcolm Miller, and I thought, gosh, that's a hell of a way to treat people. But his staff were fiercely loyal, no matter how badly he treated them. Now, that's not a strategy I'm recommending to any of you, of course, but I think it is worth pointing out that a great business, as it certainly was, with very loyal customers, as they certainly had, can actually make mistakes without losing those customers. And I'll give an example for you, particularly those of you in the United Kingdom, which is M&S, which has put a foot wrong many times over the years, but nevertheless has fiercely loyal customers. Right, going back to the reason that I tend to switch off when we talk about loyalty is there are times when I feel that we've been having the same conversation for years and years and never really progressed, other than to carry on trying to redefine the word loyalty. And I've reached the point where I think the more I know about loyalty, actually, the less I know. So that's a problem. I also realize that many of the definitions that were created at least 50 or more years ago still apply today. But for some reason, this has not stopped us trying to redefine the word. And I think that creates a problem because we can't all come together around a shared idea. Customer loyalty, I like this one, okay? Customer loyalty describes an ongoing emotional relationship between you and your customer, manifesting itself by how willing a customer is to engage with and repeatedly purchase from you versus your competitors. Now, it's a bit clunky. It then goes on to say loyalty is the byproduct of a customer's positive experience with you and works to create trust. And as anyone in the UK will know, trust is a big topic at the moment as we wait for the Sue Gray report, which I wish I had an advanced copy of, but I don't. I also, what I do like though is, so just put that definition to one side for a minute. I do like the fact that there is an increasing professionalism in loyalty. That's something that we've certainly seen over the last few years, particularly when it comes to measurement. And I certainly would like to big up Loyalty Lion's 12 crucial loyalty metrics, which I think pretty much covers everything. And I think that should always underpin both strategy and planning. So it essentially boils down to trying to win more customers, retrain the ones you have, and get them to spend more and more often and help you win, ideally, as advocates, more customers. But for some reason, it took us many years to kind of boil it down to those basics. Right. So now, if we accept that definition, the problem we have now is, what do we do about all those customers that we take for granted are loyal, even though they cannot tick all or perhaps even any of the loyalty metrics that we've just talked about, but are nevertheless considered loyal and therefore marketed to you marketed to you hard. In other words, money, right? Give you a few examples of why that isn't necessarily the right strategy. I've looked at various surveys over the years, and I've just brought a number together from the automotive industry, which interestingly found a number of large car manufacturers found that over 80% of customers who said they were delighted with their new car chose another brand within 3 years. Now, during those 3 years, they were marketed to, but something happened that the first car company was completely unaware of it, even to the extent that they would not have been aware of customer dissatisfaction over things like reliability, servicing costs, safety, whatever. So there were lots of points during the journey where the customer had kind of touched into the organization, but it was never fed through to marketing. So they never understood that actually the company was brewing up a probably more likely a disloyal customer. Let me give you another example. I hope a positive example, but nevertheless, I use it to make a point. 3 years ago, Nike, you know all about Nike. You don't need an introduction about them. They launched some running clubs, and they signed up loads of customers to take part. And this is held up as an example of excellent loyalty building, the modern way of providing customers with an immersive experience that becomes part of their lifestyle. And indeed, I think we all agree that making an emotional connection, as we said earlier, is absolutely key to loyalty, perhaps as it has always been. But is it loyalty from a commercial point of view? Because all of you need to, when you're after your budgets for investment in marketing and loyalty, you want an ROI. Are we able to see with Nike how sales have gone up as a consequence of that strategy? Are the runners in the clubs already long-standing Nike customers who don't actually need marketing to keep the loyalty? And are their activities inspiring new customers to join? Now, I've never seen any figures from Nike because I suspect in truth that it wasn't actually measured. So I think there's a problem there in terms of the follow-through. One more example I'll give you from sport, which is I'm a big fan of the brand Rafa, which I'm sure you're aware of. It's a road cycling gear, high quality stuff, or at least it used to be, and still they started manufacturing somewhere else, and a lot of brands are doing that these days. But anyway, so I'm on record with Rafa as a long-standing loyal customer when actually I'm nothing of the kind. I only buy on special through a discount website called Sports Pursuit. I've never paid full price, and will always tell everyone the story about their stuff, how their stuff isn't quite as good as it used to be. So really, they should be investing in trying to shut me up, not inviting me to their special events, which they regularly do. Now, of course, there is a whole subset of loyalty that talks about how to convert hostile customers, but I think that's a conversation for another time. Now, in terms of where we get our advice from about loyalty, so going to various trade shows over the years hasn't always helped me. And I imagine that some of you will have been in a similar position. Seminars are often a great way to kind of send people away with a few great ideas for campaigns that may engender and increase loyalty, or may do nothing of the kind, but are pursued often typically because they are classified as classic recommended loyalty activities, and the return on investment is not validated. So I'm setting myself up here to say to you later that I hope that there are enough actionable insights, as we like to call them, that you can actually take advantage of, even if what it does today with Fiona and Charlie and the team and all of their partners actually creates a mindset change, because you can always get all of the details later, but if it puts you in a different frame of mind around loyalty, then we'll have done our job. So all of this has tempted some people to question, and you will have heard this, I'm sure, does customer loyalty even exist anymore? Which is generally supported by all sorts of research to show that the under 35s are the most promiscuous generation ever seen. I mean promiscuous as in terms of moving from brand to brand, right? And they will switch at the drop of a hat. Now, I don't have an answer to that, by the way, but I do think we need more agreement about what loyalty is and how to get it and keep it so we can act on it. So I hope some of these definitions are useful to you. Now, you may have read a story recently in a publication called Business of Fashion that talks about the problem with marketing measurement in the age of social media. So, for instance, likes are now becoming increasingly discarded as a credible KPI. And it's only a few years ago where likes were kind of everything, right? You may remember that. Particularly where it can't be linked to any sort of commercial outcome. I think for a while that we had no choice because the channels were the channels, right? And it was early days. But I think there's a chance now to really move things on using deep customer data and insight to manage each channel appropriate to its capabilities and reach. Now, I say that in the context of zero-party data. So this isn't about me ignoring the fact that Google and Apple have done what they've done in terms of the cookie apocalypse, I believe you called it, Charlie. That's nice. But in order to do this, it's going to take a whole bunch of people within the organization to work together in ways that they do not currently do. So I think there's a cultural problem within some organizations to fix. and indeed a political one, where different teams can often protect their territory and current ways of working. But we can't keep saying that we all need to be customer centric if we're not rolling out the structures and the mindsets to do that and collaborate across the organizations and indeed work very closely with our vendors and partners. And then lastly, obviously, it is a technical challenge, I accept, as well, because you need the software and the data that can be presented in usable ways through apps, not spreadsheets, right? Let's get rid of spreadsheets. Optimized, possibly with AI, and I'm not going to get into the artificial intelligence conversation, but I think it's important to say that at some point that will become a thing, simply because the sheer amount of data. And then one last comment on politics. There is a debate going on with most organizations over whether to build or buy some of these solutions. And the answer for me is buy. Why would you build it? Because there are so many great solutions out there, and we're talking, this is Loyalty Lion's webinar, and I'm completely on their side. Why on earth would you try and build something when there are so many amazing solutions out there, particularly when those third-party companies are working with all sorts of other partners to optimize every element of the loyalty journey? Sorry, lecture over on that one, okay? Philosophy also over, and this is the second part of my presentation. The planning and operational challenges are getting deeper. Sorry, I want to get into some of those a little bit more deeply. So there is a suggestion that consumers are now tempted in every direction to the point that they can be lured away from their trusted brands more easily than ever, particularly as they have shifted to digital, which has opened them up, right, to a whole world of new possibilities. I still remember going into a company, a retailer called Woolworths, to take back. I bought 2 copies of a single. You won't know what that is. It's a record. You won't know what that is either, but it's a piece of music on a disc. Taking it back and being told to go away. They weren't going to give me my money back, and there was no other choice. There was no other place to go to get any of this. Whereas now we have an infinite number of channels from which to extract products and value. The shift to digital, I know that varies from country to country, and I don't know how it is in your own country. It seems to be somewhere between 10 and 30%. It's reckoned to be about 30% in the UK. I think it's 25 in North America. It kind of depends on the categories that you're operating in, although I appreciate some of you are in entirely new categories altogether. Let me give you a few more statistics. During the pandemic, you may have read this, McKinsey discovered that 75% of consumers tried new brands during the pandemic, and there is also research to show that they may well stick with those choices. Okay, so it's not a question of them going back to their old brands, and you will be well aware of some of the big brand organizations like Unilever, who are absolutely struggling to maintain loyalty for some of their core brands. The Bazaar Voice research showed that 4 out of 5 global consumers vowed to stick with new brands that they moved to during the pandemic. So that is a hell of a shift. Now, that was late 2020, so I think we can expect maybe some cooling of that. But nevertheless, you can all in the audience look to your own habits and see how you've changed and how many of those will have stuck. And that's a challenge to loyalty. And here are some more. Well, what happens if the service or the experience becomes more important than the product? What if getting your groceries delivered to you in 10 minutes becomes of greater value to you, the consumer, than where the groceries came from? Now, you'll all be aware of even in North America, a company called Aldi, who were working with what is referred to as a Q-commerce company called Deliveroo. Now, they've just ended that relationship because the demand has fallen. However, the amount of money that's being invested in some of these Q-commerce companies like Gorillas, they're certainly hoping that this is not a blip. And they seem to be growing pretty fast on demand for fast delivery. But the point I want to make to you is, who's in charge here? Is it the brand, i.e. you, or is it the third-party fulfillment company? Now, a large grocery chain in the UK called the Co-op uses a third-party Q-commerce company for fulfillment of all of its online orders, but it gets none of the customer data. So that makes no sense to me, because data, as you will agree, is everything. If you do not have that data, you cannot begin to confront all the challenges that I'm outlining. So consider your own supermarket choices, what you've done differently during the pandemic. Now, you probably said 2 years ago they were pretty fixed, but now consider what's happening. I found some research from a company called StrongPoint, and this is consumers talked about what would encourage them to stick with a particular retailer. A good online experience appears to be much stickier than in store, and 27% of the respondents across Europe said they wouldn't switch if they had had a good experience online, more than would switch than if they had had a good experience in store, which was 21%, and 17% who said that they would go from retailer to retailer in store, but they would stay loyal to one retailer online. Which is why I'm asking you, and I will keep asking you, who owns your customer? Who owns your customer? And is someone else going to own your customer over time? So the consumer trends that we've all been observing over the years, and I've worked for Mintel, I've worked for a whole bunch of companies in the days when the graph just went up, right? We sold 10% more this year, we're going to sell 10% more next year, and so on and so on. But these trends have gone haywire. And I think this is a challenge to the way that you all do things now, from a cultural, from a systems and data analytics point of view. So here's my long list of the reasons why it's all tough. And I don't mean to be a Cassandra and be kind of, pessimistic. I'm not. I'm being optimistic. I feel that it's important, though, to understand all these dynamics and react to them. So as I've just talked about at length, competition inside and outside your sector is going to grow. There's no question of that. Your customers are going to become more demanding, as if they weren't already demanding, right? They want free delivery. They want free returns through any channel. And that's only going to get worse. Now, you might say, well, at some point, we're going to have to charge for returns and delivery and so on and so on. But, well, good luck with that. You're dealing also with much shorter attention spans from your customers, simply because of the proliferation of information channels available to them, and the fact that you yourselves are probably trading through multiple channels, stores, your own websites, marketplaces, and TikTok. And I have to mention the lovely TikTok, I'm afraid. And then I suppose one day, God help us, the metaverse. And if you think this social sales stuff isn't real, in the US in 2020, it was 26.9 billion. So it's real, and it's going to grow very fast. And there's lots of research to show that marketeers are piling into TikTok and Instagram and SEO in a big way. Next problem is you've got Generation Z or Generation Z, depending where you're from, being described as disloyal for all of these reasons. You've got much lower effectiveness of traditional channels such as the store. So if any of you are running stores, there is a conversation going on right now as to how do I make the store profitable? Because yes, we recognize that it's an important brand influencer, it's an important generator of loyalty and so on and so on. But the CFO is going to want to put some hard ROI against that, right, in time. And then, of course, you've got, and again, I'm sure you're all aware of this, the pressure you're getting from your customers to demonstrate purpose, relevance, inclusivity, sustainability, community involvement, and so on. There's quite a long list, right? They're putting you in there on the front foot, as it were, on the back foot rather, to demonstrate all of these things, whilst also continuing to sell products and services. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, another little list here. How am I doing for time, Fiona? I'm okay, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Cool. So here's a few more things that you're dealing with because of the is higher wages in all territories, shortage of staff, and I think a shortage of staff that may not go away because the assumption that lots of people are queuing up to work in retail, that seems not to be true at the moment. Supply chain disruptions, which continue, new workplace legislation that favors the employee over the employer. And you might say, well, that's fair enough, but that's coming and that has a cost to it. Data protection pressures, which you don't need any lecture from me about, with the Google and Apple opt-outs and so on and so on. And then rising costs through inflation, which is everywhere, which you cannot pass on. To give you an example, the retailer Superdry is putting up its prices and has stopped discounting. Is that going to work? Are their customers really so loyal that they can get away with it? And why did you tell anyone? I'm not sure I would have necessarily announced that bit of bad news, but anyway, good luck to Superdry on that one. And then my last list for you, where it gets even more challenging if you believe the various predictions that are being made out there, is that customers will expect to have more skin in the game, even to the extent that they might even want to get shares in your business. Now, you may embrace that, but it is being talked about not, we've talked about employee ownership for many years, but now we're talking about customer ownership. So obviously with ownership, there is a need for visibility and traceability and collaboration. So that's an interesting one to consider. They are demanding more buy now, pay later options, or consumer credit, as it used to be called. And let's never forget that BNPL is, at the end of the day, just consumer credit. So you're having to stump up for that. And customers are also expecting brands just to be more open about their operations. And there's a cost to that, right? As a number of brands have discovered to their horror that their supply chains have become open to inspection, and the customers have not liked what they've seen in terms of where products are manufactured, how much staff are paid, how they're treated, and so on and so on. And then I think the last one is, I think consumers are just going to expect more rewards, right? I mean, I think they're spoiled enough as it is, personally, but they're going to want and expect more free stuff because people are just handing out more free stuff, right? So you get pulled into that, sadly, and that adds to the costs. And then lastly, add to this, the more you know about your customers, the harder it is to market to them in the right way. So bear with me. What I mean by that is there is an extreme polarization going on. For me, no British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, would be for me about as bad as losing my religion. But for my children, it doesn't mean anything because they don't watch the TV anyway. All right. So that's a huge polarization. Where do we sit in the middle to agree on what's important? So in that context, what have we got? Fortunately, as our webinar will show you, there's certainly no shortage of software data and analytics, and increasingly you are getting the benefits of the vendors, as I said earlier, partnering to offer solutions, which is a contrast, a big contrast to the old days when everyone was competing with each other or offering point solutions that possibly solved one problem, but kind of prevented you from solving others because there was simply no cross compatibility between all of those. That's changed completely now. And there is a wealth of data, which should, in theory, enable you to market accurately to every single tribe, if I can call them that, in exactly the right way. But I appreciate how hard that can be, because it's always been true that if you have what's called market of one, where you're marketing personally to every single customer, what's the actual cost of doing that? And am I rewarding the right customers, the ones who are most valuable to me, as opposed to giving lovely gifts away to people who actually don't shop? I was going to end on artificial intelligence, which is a hell of a way to end a presentation. I think I would bear in mind, though, that the data burden is going to become much more onerous. There are all sorts of solutions out there that are going to be able to help, because obviously I want anyone involved in loyalty, anyone in marketing, to be free, if you like, to focus on the good stuff, the fun stuff in loyalty, rather than having to plow through vast amounts of data. And I think there is a case for saying that more automation is needed, so that a lot of that legwork is done, so that teams can, as I say, focus on the fun stuff. So that's my presentation. I hope that it's changed everybody's minds to focus much more on this stuff. Really, I just want to finish by saying that however we define loyalty, it's more important than ever, because someone's coming to steal your customers, all right? So you need to hold on to them.
Brilliant. Chris, thank you so much. What a great way to get us into the loyalty mindset for the day. I know that for me, in all of the conversations that we had leading up to today, the idea of the polarization of consumers and the idea that you can't really apply just one demographic to any one individual has really got me thinking quite differently. Before we let you go, we would like to pick your brains a little further, if that's okay. And we've got a few questions that have come in here. I'll just find them. Cool. My first question, do you use TikTok?
Vicariously, I think is the right word, because my children use it, and I have to say, oh dear. And I've discovered actually the demographics are a little older than you might think, because I was thinking, oh, they're all 17 years old. I've got two younger children, 13 and 15. They obviously use it, but actually, it's quite popular amongst 35-year-olds. And there's lots of older people making idiots of themselves on TikTok. But seriously, if you look at some of the campaigns that were run by, I think, Balenciaga and Gucci, oh my God, absolutely unbelievable. The numbers involved and the conversion rates on some of the advertising was astonishing. I think the trick is, and my eldest daughter works for TikTok, is it's quite easy to be crap at it, right? So you've got to be cool, you've got to be hip, you've got to be switched on. So yeah, but it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a huge amount of money piling into to TikTok.
Definitely, and just growing on the commerce agenda, definitely. Yeah. Well, yeah, as someone who remembers Woolworths and singles, I had assumed it wasn't for me, but maybe I need to reassess there. Amazing. And so we'll jump to some of the questions that we've had come through. First one, really interesting, actually. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think that loyalty is climbing up the agenda of the senior business leaders as yet, or is it still mostly something that the people closest to customers are thinking about? Is it just on a marketer's mind, or is it actually becoming more important at a senior level?
I don't think it is, but I think it should, of course. And I think retail CEOs, particularly with larger companies, are under a huge amount of pressure because they have got a very long list of priorities. I mean, to give you an example, if you're running stores, your number one priority is to keep your customers safe and secure, right? And the second is probably to know that you are operating legally, right? Top priorities, very dull, very boring. So actually finding time to worry about customer loyalty. But I'm hoping my presentation makes the point that your customers are more vulnerable than ever, and therefore it is important, and that loyalty has to imbue the entire organization. It simply cannot be a campaign or a thing that a team over in that corner is responsible for. Everyone has to get involved, and I think you have to accept the hard and the soft metrics. You know, the CFO is going to have to accept that it isn't all about I was going to say pounds, shillings, and pence. That dates me. Euros, dollars, whatever. So yes, it has to imbue the whole organization. An easy thing to say. I don't think it does, but it will have to, because of those competitive pressures.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's challenging to know how to kick that off, or where to start it, which department to start it in, or which task force to build involving which people to get to that stage, I think. Fantastic, thank you. Moving on to that idea of keeping your customers safe and building a sense of trust with them. We have a question here. Do you think that we're all getting too distracted by the consumer agenda? There's a need to prove that you're authentic, to prove that you're not greenwashing. This is what's being demanded. are we all spending a little bit too much time worrying about that and not enough time worrying about fulfillment and running a business?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think I haven't helped. I haven't helped in my presentation, because I think the thing is, we are overexposed to the media and social channels. So it's quite easy to get distracted, as people do. And we're told by psychologists that the human brain is more than capable of moderating and processing all of the information that's coming at it from multiple channels. No, it isn't. It isn't. There's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. And I think the truth is, yes, and I see it in quite a few companies who are always reacting to events instead of keeping their heads down and focusing on a strategy. The British government is a good example, right? So they're getting on with it. Although, to be fair, it's having to react to quite a few events, but that's the truth of it, and that's always been true. But particularly today, because there is exposure to the news flow through so many different channels, it's very common, I know, for a CEO to turn around and say, "We need to. What are we doing about this? What are we doing about this? What are we doing about this?" I think better to build a rock hard strategy and run it out. Yes, there will be all sorts of things that happen on the journey, and if you can build some agility into it, but the only way to stick with it is to make sure that the data inputs are good, that the understanding of the customer is good, and it doesn't always come from the marketing department. It's going to come from other parts of the business. I mean, a lot of companies don't use their trading data. Why not? There's a lot of sanity in there, and I think replenishment data, supply chain data, there's a lot of data that needs to be used in order to get to the point where you've got a better idea of where demand is, where you can start to kind of sense demand. I think it's then much easier to build marketing programs around that, are much more likely to perform well, particularly if they are supported by good availability. All right. No point in marketing to people if you haven't got the stock. And let me tell you that a lot of retailers don't have the stock, but they're marketing the hell out of it, and that upsets people.
Yeah, a bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah.
I suppose it's one way this could develop over time is more and more brands that are launching today or growing today have been built around a cause or a value that they represent. So it's rather than having to sort of adopt something and then prove through your marketing that you do support that value or that you are really personally invested in a brand as that thing. More and more today, brands are being born out of a commitment to a cause or a thing.
Yes. That's I mean, how long have you got? That's a hell of a question. These are all very good questions, because there's been a bit of a backlash, as you know. Unilever tried to acquire GSK recently and kind of screwed it up, and the general feeling in the financial community and amongst the shareholders was you got problems at home. You need to focus on your core brands. And quite a few of the consumer brands companies are discovering that their core reliable brands, the tomato ketchups and tomato sauce and all the rest of it, are under attack from private labels. So you need to kind of go back and focus on what you do well, I think. What was the question?
No, it was more of just a discussion point than a question, that one.
Yeah, but I think there is a backlash against purpose. That's my that's my point. So of course it's important, and I'm a great fan of some of you will know a brand called Allbirds, who have a sustainable manufacturing supply chain all the way back to back to the very beginning. And it's a great story that they deliver extremely well in store, as you might imagine, and indeed online. So that the whole product is the purpose is the product and vice versa. So that's a big deal for them. But I think there are other companies that are saying we have to be purpose-led on everything, and are just not running the business properly. You need to make sure you're manufacturing in sufficient quantities that are in demand, getting your distribution right, your availability, your forecasting, all of those things. So you've got to keep doing what it is that you do well. And I think purpose is something yes, it's fine for startups for whom they started, but to kind of reverse engineer a business on purpose is, it's tricky. It's dangerous. You know, you've got to do it well.
Otherwise, you erode that trust.
Jigsaw does it well. That's a heritage brand that talks about sustainability and has done a very good job under, I think it's Beth Hardwick. You know, fantastic business. But there aren't a huge number of examples. And better, I think, to always react to what your customer is saying, you know, and if you know them and you can talk to them and you've got a decent feedback loop, they'll tell you what's too much or too little when it comes to purpose. But I think, yes, there's a kind of trend to kind of wave purpose in front of people's faces and expect them to, you know, think that's important.
No, that does make sense. And a great question here from Anthony. Is it your experience that most CEO or even CMOs think that loyalty equals points and schemes, or that loyalty equals more of a mindset shift across the business?
Yeah, I think I would say pre-pandemic, there was still that kind of view that even if companies accepted that it wasn't just points mean prizes, that when it came to execution, that's how it got run out. And I think that's changed. Actually, the rewards are much more, from a lot of companies, are much more, what's the word? They're rewards in terms of experience. They're more experiential, which I think is important because there are any number of brands that we'd all value getting much closer to without necessarily being financially rewarded. Having said that, you need both, right? I mean, you know, I think it's possible to go kind of too far in the other direction. At the end of the day, people are still looking for value. And this is where research doesn't help us, because if you ask people these questions, they go, I want all the rewards, I want the money off, I want this, and you're thinking, hang on, how do I sort of, you know, bring those two together? I do think part of it comes back to getting a better understanding of customers, because we're still at a place where when you go into a store, you're a ghost. As a customer, you're a ghost. You're invisible. Nobody knows who the hell you are, and therefore how to serve you, apart from be polite and nice and as helpful as possible, and that's fine. But we need to crack that one, I think, so that you're identified through multiple channels. It doesn't have to be invasive. It doesn't have to be creepy. There's ways to do it well, and that in itself is a reward. So often the rewards are not necessarily financial, they're more immersive in terms of feeling that you're part of something. Now, I don't necessarily want someone to come running up to me in M&S and say, whatever, although it'd be quite nice, wouldn't it, to be greeted as some stores do, and there's still a value to that. But the fact that you can go in and leave and you were invisible throughout the entire process is, I think we need to solve that one, particularly as stores for many retailers are fighting to justify their existence, because we are still on a bit of a downturn in terms of numbers.
Yeah, and I think years ago there was all this conversation about, is it RFID tags? I think so. When you walk into a store, you will be personally recognised, and I'm not sure I'd like that, if I'm completely honest. But if you can recognize people in that way and you can make them feel really valued, then you sort of open up that feedback loop. You've then got some really some connected customers who you can go and say, okay, what do you want from us? What would you like an experience to look like? And get that feedback loop going.
Yeah, and I suppose you wouldn't. I think the problem is nobody wants to be the first mover on that in case you screw it up. And there's as you know, there's lots of examples of well-intentioned. I think it was an energy company telling its customers how to keep warm, you know, because they obviously can't afford to buy fuel, and that went down like a lead balloon. But you could argue, well, you know, it should be the responsibility of an energy company to maybe make suggestions. I think it's a question of how it's done. But I think there's a little bit of fear that you can mess up, so people don't necessarily go there.
Yes, yeah, it is hard to be the first one to jump, isn't it? We're very close to time, but I just want to ask you one quick fire question before we go. So in the past 24 months, we've had a pandemic, we've had iOS updates, we've had Brexit, we've had fulfillment issues. Some of these were completely out of the blue, some arguably could have been foreseen. To the best of your knowledge, what's the biggest curveball coming in 2022?
Well, I think the curveball is already here, which is inflation, which is just the cost of everything. And for some people, that means that I read something somewhere that said that for some people, 54% of their income is energy bills. You think, whoa, okay. So I think that is the curveball. I think it would be foolish of me to suggest that there's something that completely unforeseen. The truth is the COVID, if I can use that medical term, it's not a medical term, it is casting a long shadow. There's no question. But I feel that it is in your businesses, it is grounds for optimism, provided you can. Yes, of course, you've got two almost conflicting challenges, which is how to manage business as usual and just kind of keep going, motivate staff, recruit, just keep everything on the road in the context of Brexit, supply chain disruptions, and so on and so on. But at the same time, recognize the value of information, data, whatever you want to call it, about your customers, and trying to make more of it. Because, and I'm sure today there'll be a conversation about zero-party data. It's extremely valuable. There's lots of companies who operate very effectively on zero-party data before it was even called zero-party data, right? Just, web scraping, all sorts of data that can be used. And I think I would urge companies to do that better and to think about what data we're actually talking about, because I think some of the conventional data does need to be enriched with data from other sources in order to give you a better picture of your customers. And then I think to make a more direct and personal appeal to them, because I think a lot of consumers themselves are confused, and I don't think they necessarily made a conscious decision to move from this brand to that brand. It might have been a price decision in many cases, but I think it's got to the point where customers almost kind of need some guidance, and I think a clear message from their brands, and clear means short, consistent, and compelling, right? I think is the trick in the context of all this disruption, which is just going to continue, because Brexit, okay, that's just UK, but we're gonna live with the shadow. We're living in the shadow of that, and will do for a number of years. And the supply chain stuff and all the changes and so on.
And cross-border commerce expanding the way it is as well.
Yeah, cross-border commerce huge. There's a whole other subject, and marketplaces, and then these new channels. Because I just mentioned TikTok, but there are others. So how you market well across all of those to a customer that you're able to identify that is using all of those channels, and they are using all of those channels because they had to during the pandemic and will continue to. That's a big job, and I think that's why Charlie introduced this, or I think maybe you did, Fiona, that maybe let's worry about the customers we've got and hold on to the ones we've got, rather than spending too much time and money trying to recruit new ones at this stage.
Absolutely. Chris, I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there. I could keep talking to you all day, but a huge thank you for joining us. Zero-party data is going to be a hot topic on our agenda today, so great setup for that. A lot of food for thought there, and thank you again for spending the time with us today.
No, it's a pleasure, and thank you all for paying attention. I hope you're all still with us, because I think it is a fascinating subject. It touches on so many other things that aren't necessarily just about loyalty, and that's what makes it so interesting.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris.
Pleasure.